Perfect. Awesome. So my name is Karen Medina. I don't know if some of you have listened to any of our sessions lately. So just doing my intro again. Karen Medina, I've been at NAV for about 4 years now. I've been recruiting for UX designers since I started at NAV, so about 4 years. I do feel like I got thrown into I don't know, the wolves but not really. Like I learned the hard way, I think, but it was the best way for me, right? To learn about UX design and what's important and what's not. So when I first started, I got to work with more senior designers, and they kind of walked me through, what mattered, what was important, what I need to be looking for. So yeah, it's been pretty fun. I've been doing it ever since then. So it's been amazing, and I love hiring for UX designers. It's just super, super fun just to understand how you think as a designer. So yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'll have G introduce herself, and then I'll jump into kind of like my spiel. Then today's session is about storytelling, and that we'll go more into detail about what that means. So G.
Thanks. So again, for those who don't know me, my name is G. I was a bootcamp newbie graduate around last May, and then I landed this current job around August. And ever since then, I've just been helping other junior designers kind of navigate their job search. And so Karen and I created this like UX coffee chat, or what we want to call it, because we really thought it gave like a really unique perspective from a bootcamp newbie and also the recruiter who Springboard. It's a really good boot camp. And then the recruiter who discovered me. So we were talking about storytelling, like Karen was saying, and we're super excited. Karen's gonna go over like the interviewing version of it, like how to kind of talk about your story to the first interview, and then I'm gonna be talking about more in terms of the creating the case study. So I'm gonna shoot it back over to Karen, and she's gonna go over a few things.
Perfect, thank you. So first I wanted to talk about why, what's the meaning of storytelling, right? And why it's important. I think for me, when it comes to storytelling, it means really understanding how you tell us your story. And I've always spoken the sessions as me as a recruiter. So this is how, like I talk about like storytelling. So really what I want to understand is who you are as a designer. Like if you can help me and explain to me your work and what you've done, what you've accomplished, but really bringing me along, right? Across, like alongside with the hiring manager and the team. I'm not and I always say this, I'm not a designer by trade, but I've hired enough people to pick apart the things that I really do need and the things that really matter. So that's kind of what that looks like. I'm gonna share my screen because I always like to have a visual just so I can follow along. So if I look this way, it's because my screen is this way. So FYI. So give me 1 second. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about the interview, right? So when I jump in, I'm doing my interview. What I usually do is that I do ask for people to tell me about a case study, right? So when I'm interviewing, I'm usually like, okay, I usually have 30 to 45 minutes. I don't have a lot, because I'm just the first one, right? And I'm trying to get to know you. But there are specific things that I'm looking for, right, as a designer. So I get to the interview and I'm like, okay, let's go to your portfolio, right? Pick the one that you're the most excited about, and that's the one that we're gonna go over, okay? So ideally, if you are applying for a specific company, like that has a specific like niche or that's a specific industry, like ideally you should pick that one, the one that's closest to that industry, so that way you can talk about it, right? But also make sure that it's the one that you're passionate about. So then in past sessions, we've talked about how maybe you shouldn't have a lot of cases or projects in your portfolio, because you might forget all the details that you added or everything that you did. And let's say that another recruiter asks you, right, to talk about maybe another project that you were not ready to prepare. It makes it a little harder. That's why you should have maybe 5 to 6, I think we said last time, in your portfolio. Don't have a lot, because you have to be ready to answer some questions, okay? So FYI on that. Also be cautious of time, because sometimes, like I said, I have 30 to 45 minutes, and if you talk for the whole time, it's awful, right? Because I can't ask you any questions and you just talk for 45 minutes and you're like, okay, now what? It's like, well, I don't know now what because you wasted all of our time. So be cautious on that as well. Because it also for me as a recruiter, I'm like, okay, are they going to be able to track their own time when they're working alone from home, right? So it goes back to like how you share your story and how you talk about yourself and how you manage your time as well. So be conscious of that. I recommend that if we do have about 30 minutes, that you do 10 minutes about your project and explaining it. If you have 45 minutes, maybe do 15. Also, if you are unsure of what the recruiter is looking for, ask the question. Like, don't be afraid to ask, because at the end of the day, and I know that we recruiters get we have a lot of bad reputation. But for me, I know that at the end of the day, like I'm here to help, right? Like I'm here to be a partner. I'm the one sending people, so they're my people. I'm like, okay, I'm sending this person. I want him to get hired. What can I do better, right? So I usually like sit in other interviews so I know and prepare you the best way possible. So that's why like it's important for us to get our story straight from the beginning, so that way it's going to help me help you move forward, right? And prepare you better for your next rounds. So okay, so I'll talk a little bit about what I asked for. So when I talk to someone, I ask, hey, tell me about what the problem was, what you did, and what was the solution. Okay, so that's what I want to know. And I tell them, I'm like, I want to understand your thought process. So this is what we're doing here. Not a designer by trade. I don't need to know the details, but I do need to understand, what work you did. Okay, so FYI, and I've shared this one before. Everybody can see my screen, right? The cost. Okay, so I shared this one before. When I asked her to talk about it, she this is the one I wanted her to pick, and luckily she did, because it's the one closest to us. So right now we do fintech, right? So that's insurance as well. So she has this. I was like, okay, that's perfect. That's the one I want to talk about. It's the one that's closest to the NAV industry. Tell me more, right? So and then at the same time that she's pulled it up in her page, I have it pulled up as well. So we're both looking at it. So I'm like, okay, perfect. She talks to me about what she's solving for, what she did. I'm following along. Again, I don't need to read all the details. I don't have time because it's only 30 minutes. So we don't have time to go over all of it, okay? But I do need to understand the thought process. So she talks to me about, the customers. She's like, okay, we did X, Y, and Z, and this is how we got our information for our customers. She talks to me about the competitors. I'm like, okay, so why did why those competitors matter, right? Like those are the questions that I would ask. So it's important that that you remember your project and that you remember why you did the things that you did, because sometimes we will ask, right? Like why did that matter? And why would you not do it differently? So keep that in mind. So when you're sharing your own story, make sure that you're able to bring people along on the work that you did. Again, that's why I only have a few cases. So here's this. More detail. She goes on and talks to me about, what she did here. I'm like, okay, great. Then we get to the persona. I'm a sucker for personas. I love it. I love when a candidate talks about persona, only because it helps me see that they know like what they're doing, that they know that their design is more than just something beautiful, right? But it's really like bringing a specific customer, right? So really understanding the customer, really understanding the impact, really seeing it through and be like, hey, like I'm designing for this persona because we know that this is our customer, right? And we know what result we're gonna get. So this is why I like when people talk about personas, because it helps me understand that you know what you're working on, that you're not just doing it for, for the heck of it, which it's fine if you do it for that. just not for this job interview, right? That we could be having. Okay. And sorry, did I interrupt anyone or no? I'm good. Just let go now. Okay, cool. Okay. Also, we go on. She talks to me a little bit about this. Again, I've mentioned this many times before. I don't know why. I'm a sucker for sticky notes. If you show me something like this, I just want to understand again, right? The quick version of it. Like, okay, we did this analysis. This is what we got. This is what we were thinking, right? And then this is what we heard, what the gain is. I was like, okay, perfect. Because again, if you can explain to me your research, like that's perfect. Because for me, I'm trying to understand your thought process, and then let's see, the hiring manager might go into more detail, and then the team will go to more specific detail, right? Like, what did you use? Why did you use Figma, right? Like, just things like that. But be cautious of your audience and what story you're giving that person. Okay. Okay. Perfect. More information here. I don't really care for this. It's really tiny, so we can definitely skip, right? She can just talk about like, oh, this is easy to navigate. This is how it started. Move forward. Okay. And then here, navigate through the process. So this is what I would really like to know more about, like on why this matters and why did you believe that this was the right process for the customer, right? So if you can explain that to me, I love it. Like, I'm like, perfect, awesome. Again, you're a user experience designer. I want to know that you care about the user, right? And that they can like use your design to move forward and to really get what we're trying to accomplish. This is why your story is very, very important. Okay, because yeah, I can definitely read this by myself. I can definitely look at the pictures by myself. But the way that you explain this, and I probably skipped this, I apologize. I tend to get a little nervous sometimes when I talk. Make sure that you do pick the one that you're most passionate about when you talk about, because, and the importance of that, it's because it's hard for any company to teach you passion. I can teach you about the business, I can teach you about strategy, I can teach you almost everything. But when it comes to passion and the work that you do, like, it's important for you to show that. That's why make sure that you pick a case that you're passionate about, because when you talk about it and when you describe it to the recruiter, to the team, to the hiring manager, it's gonna show. And that's hard to teach. Like passion and love for what you do is really, really hard to teach. So FYI. Okay. So we talk about optimizing the experience here. I love this, right? I love when somebody walks me through like, okay, our thought process was X, Y, and Z. We moved here, and then we decided that because, X happened, we have to go this way. I was like, okay, perfect. Again, awesome, right? I'm still following along the sketches as well, to be like, hey, I started with this sketch with all the data that we gathered, with all the information, with all the feedback, with all the surveys that we did on people. This was the end result, right? Like, that's what I want to see as well. Like, I want to understand like what happened and how you got from this to this. So I want to know that. Also have different, if you can have an app and desktop version, like that's kind of fun to have also. Especially like, I know for us, like at Nav, we do both, right? We do our website, and right now we're pushing a lot harder on our app. So there's things like that too to keep in mind as well. Again, you can always ask a recruiter in advance, like, hey, are you guys focusing on anything specific that I should be aware? Right? Like, so that way you change your story to, if they're focusing on an app, you talk more about the app, right? Because if you're gonna talk about desktop, they're not gonna care because they're already working. That's done. So keep that in mind. Okay. More details, right? She gives me more about the tablet and mobile stuff, mobile images. I was like, okay, perfect. I love that. I love the difference, the different things that she didn't just focus on one. So I love that. So there's that. Then she can be like, hey, let's start our journey, right? This is our interactive prototype. Awesome. This worked. This is the research. We noticed X, Y, and Z, and that was it. Perfect. Then she talks to me about the reflection and the next steps. I've mentioned this before, but I want to always mention this and make sure that everybody knows that even if you don't have like a final conclusion where it's like, I don't know, 25% of customers came back, right? Or 25% of customers open our emails and are now Nav customers. That's okay if you don't have that, but just make sure you have something, even if that's, like, we don't have any data till, I don't know, the next 6 months, we will. Only because I also am trying to see if you understand like why the work that you do matters, right? Like what are you trying to solve this whole time? Because you can go on and on and on and on, but then if you don't know, like, okay, like, did it work? Like, cool, or, yeah, right? Like, I want to know that. I want to make sure that you know that. Okay, so that would be the most important thing there. Also, I do want to talk about the importance of your storytelling across the way. So it doesn't just stop in your portfolio, right? It really starts from your resume to your portfolio to your interview. And what I mean with that, I asked for permission from G to share her resume really quick. so you will see it. Can everybody see her resume? Yes, good. Okay, perfect. So right here, when I interview Jean, she gives me her projects right away, right? Like on top. So she talks about the Penny Bee personal finance mobile app. So personal finance, perfect, because we're a fintech company, right? So it's awesome. Also, mobile app, perfect. We're working on our mobile. That's what I want to see. So from the beginning, and even like leading to our interview, I'm like, okay, I hope this is the case that she picks because that's the one I want to talk about, right? Because that's the one that connects to NAV. So we get into the interview process and she's like, yeah, we're going to talk about Penny Bee. I'm like, perfect, makes total sense, awesome. So that's what I mean with make sure your story goes across the way. Like she did her resume, we got to her portfolio and her case, so that connected again. And then, she kept connecting it with the other interviews. So that's what I mean with that as well. And then let's see. Again, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask the recruiter what they're looking for, to ask the hiring manager what they're looking for, and to ask the team what they're looking for, because that might be a different story that you may want to share. And I would highly encourage you to ask from the beginning, because sometimes you will just go off and on about something that they don't even care about, right, in that stage of the interview. So ask for that. And I think maybe like a bad storytelling would be something where somebody, again, right, takes the whole hour or whatever time you have to talk about one case. That's bad. That's a bad storytelling. Please don't ever do that. And the other extreme is that you just say 1, 2, 3, right? The problem was X, I did X, solution was X. It's like, okay, but what did you do? Like, I need details, right? I need to understand the whole process. And if you just shut down and you're like, no, that's it, like, okay, then I'm also done, right? Like, I'll help you if you help yourself, and right, like there's that as well. So I did have a quick question for Jean, because I know that she's always been very open about changing her resume, changing her portfolio, and things like that. So I was wondering if you, like, at what point did it click for you to change your story, right? To make sure that your story matched like the work that you had been doing. Like, is there something that happened, or are you just like, I'm just gonna go and see what happens? Like, is there something that changed? Like, I mean, for our interview, obviously it worked, right? Because we are here today. So I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, definitely. So storytelling has been, I think, the most difficult part of my case studies or my portfolio in general. And in the beginning, I didn't know like that was a thing, like existed. I read the word storytelling across like multiple LinkedIn posts, but I never really paid attention to it. And then I got a feedback from like ADP list, and they were saying like, you pretty much have no storytelling skills. And I'm like, okay. And they were like, you need to tell the story better. I'm like, okay, cool, let me do that. And then I got out of the call and I started working on it. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean? Like, what is that? Like, what does storytelling mean in terms of case study? And so I did a little bit of digging, and then I got a little bit more feedback here and there. And that's when I started understanding, okay, so really the word storytelling in terms of our case study is more about telling like our design process, our thinking process, the way our brain works, like who we are as a designer and what makes us unique and what can we bring to the table. And then also being able to tie my background. So my background was fashion design. I did that for about 10 years. Being able to tie your previous career into the UX without taking the focal point, still keeping UX the focal point, was like a big part of what I was trying to accomplish at the end. And so when I applied to NAV, kind of Karen pointed out like the fintech. I put like financial personal app and a mobile app, and I put the link. Like those are all part of like my story and what I wanted to highlight. And the reason why I put Penny Bee in the first is because I knew that that's what connected to the company the most. Again, it's the storytelling, it's connecting everything together. And I forgot who I spoke to in the company. I like reached out to them in LinkedIn and I asked, just a quick question. And then I found out that they were focusing on, or they were building their mobile app. Like they have one, but they're trying to make it better. So then I decided to put the keyword like mobile app, and then again, like linking it to it. And of course, that's what I presented across all my interviews. So by then, towards the end, I kind of understood what my story was, who I am, what I used to be, aka fashion designer, and what I am now as a UX, and then what can I bring to the table as a UX designer. But it took a lot to get there. It took a lot of digging. It took a lot of feedback, and it took a lot of I guess like homework on my end to figure out what my story was. And that's the thing about like our story, is that it's so unique to us, and it's so important to showcase that in our interview, in our resume, in our portfolio. But it's difficult to figure out what your story is unless you dig deep and unless you go beyond like the surface level. So yeah, that's my that was my journey to storytelling.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that. Well, that was my part of my, the information that I was gonna share. So I'm gonna have G kind of tell us a little bit about her perspective and how she's been learning and dealing with storytelling and what has worked and what maybe didn't.
Yeah, so to kind of go back to like me not knowing what storytelling was, I think until the end, no one person had like the same answers for what storytelling means in terms of like case study. So towards the end, the definition I got of it, I just ran with it, and thank goodness it worked. So a lot of things that I'll be sharing is actually a lot of the same points that Karen brought up. But again, like she kind of talked about more about like the interview part of it. And I'm gonna be talking more about like designing the case study. So how do we showcase the same story without being able to talk to someone about it and explain to someone about it? So there's, I think in general, like a couple of points that I wanted to make. Number one is I wanted to kind of go over like, again, in a very high level, what is storytelling in terms of case study. So it is pretty much helping our users, or the recruiter, the hiring managers, follow along in the creation of the product, and also showing them who we are as a designer, how our brain works, and also trying to get to simplify a complex project into something that's digestible in small bits. So that's on a very high level, pretty much what storytelling is, and it's kind of like connecting everything and then pretty much creating a fluid or like a flow through like the process and what we did to achieve the end goal, and helping them follow along easily. So the biggest thing about creating your story is, again, like showcasing what is special about you as a UX designer, right? What differs you from everyone else? Like, why should you get hired versus the person next to you, especially if they have a year or two in experience and you have zero? How do you go through that? And it's all about like who you are. So really, it's all about it's less about the what and more about the how and the why, the how and the why. And everyone, so pretty much like everyone knows how to utilize the tool and how to make the tools. We learned how to do the journey maps and the personas and wireframes and interview, but all of those are tools. And that's not enough for us to get the job, because it's literally the minimum amount of information we need to know in order to even qualify as a UX designer. So beyond that, what else is there? It's our brain. That's what they're hiring, because honestly, like, they can teach us how to further create a better personas. They can teach us how to make better wireframes, but what they can't really quite teach us is two things, and one of them Karen touched upon is passion, and then the other thing is how our brain works. So meaning like, how do we process information? How do we organize information? How do we pick out what's the most important information? How do we distinguish like important information versus non-important information? Are we empathetic? Can we walk in the shoes of our users? All of that cannot necessarily be taught. And that's what they're looking for, and that's the thing we need to showcase. So we're pretty much showcasing our brain, not necessarily our project. So the first point in like this overall thing is, it's not about the deliverables, it's more about the process. So I'm sure everyone's seen like that Dribbble portfolio where you go in and they say, oh, the problem is XYZ. And then in the next section, they just show the final product. There's no explanation. There's no like how we got there. There's no what tools did I use to get there, who my users are, none of that. It's just like, here's the pretty final product. And that's absolutely not what UX design is about. UX is all about the process. It's all about understanding the user, gathering the data, utilizing the data, brainstorming, and then creating wireframes and testing it out. Like, that's all UX, and that's what we want to show. Now to go to a little bit deeper, we also want to show our thought process. So things like, why did we do what we did, right? Why did we create a persona? And not just because the bootcamp told us to. Like if we were working on a real project in a company and we decided to create a persona, like why? What did that accomplish? Also, why did you create the persona the way you did, right? Like for example, the persona says, her main frustration is XYZ. Like why is her main frustration XYZ? Where did you get that from? Is that based off the data? Or is that just like a self-assumption? Like what is it? So all of that kind of goes into like the thought process. Why did you create a mid fidelity instead of a low fidelity? Why did you create a mid fidelity at all? Like why did you test it? And kind of being able to communicate the why is a really big part of the storytelling. And so pretty much like, again, like going back to like, think of it as showcasing your mind, not the project or not the tool. So a couple of things that we can include in our case study to like tell the story is, besides like why did we pick out those things, is also like kind of digging deep and asking yourself like why did I do this? And then once you get that answer, then you ask yourself like why did I do that? And then once you get that answer, then dig even deeper and ask why did you do this? So for example, some of the things that we show in our case studies are like our solutions. So we go from our studies, our competitive analysis, all the information, then we make an affinity map, and then we have all of the details laid out. And then we show our sketches or a low fidelity. But it's like, what happened in between there? Like, how did you get to your sketches, right? If we sketched out a app, why did we decide to build an app? Why did we decide to create these like couple of features? Why do we think those are the solution? It's little details like that that really shows the way our brain works. Because if you were to give 100 different designers the same problems, the same set of data, the same set of like everything, and then tell them to brainstorm, probably they'll come up with like 80 different solutions, in little details or big details. And so that's what I mean. Like if you came up with that specific solution, figure out why you did it. Why did your brain decide to pick out this information and make the solution this way? And then to be able to take that, once you I guess answer your own question, like why did I decide to create an app, or why did I decide to make the solution this way? Then you can figure out what your thought process was, and that's the thought process that you want to include in your portfolio. So actually, I kind of want to share my portfolio just for a visual example of that. I'm having technical difficulties. Okay. Everyone could see my screen, right? Okay. So like I was saying before, usually it goes from a persona, or at least the way I did it. I did a persona, and then I did like a how restatement, and then I went straight into my sketches. But then the more feedback I got, and the more I knew about like what storytelling is, and that I need to focus on displaying my thought process, I was like, okay, so then like, why did I choose a mobile app? Why not was it like a notebook or a website or any other, maybe a coaching? Why did I choose an app? Also, why did I choose to show a net worth and accounts? Like why did I choose for the bottom tabs for there to be budget, for there to be learn? Like these are all things that I might have done subconsciously when I was learning, when I was creating the product. But now is the time to really understand how your brain works and kind of rip that apart. So then once I got more feedback, once I understood it, I broke it down. And so I showed how why I got to those stages. So I wanted to show that I base all of my design off of data, off of my research. So I took my key findings, and let's say, for example, the first one was, the potential users already uses mobile app for their budgeting. So I want to keep it familiar. The second one is they needed reminders or reasons to stay on track. And then third problem that I found was that they don't know how much money they spent. And usually that ends up with negative balances or such. So my solution based on my key finding was a mobile app for these reasons, because the users can set notifications, which creates the good habits. And then also it's an on the go. So they can always check their balance. There's no reason why they should not know their account balance. So that is my thought process of why I chose to do a mobile app. So this is kind of like what shows, like this is me showcasing how my brain works and how do I take the data and the findings and how do I come up with the solution or the best solution possible. And these are the details that are usually missing from like portfolios that are not as successful. So that's an example of showing your thought process. Also, another things that we want to include are anything that went wrong. So I don't necessarily have like a turning point in mind, but I've spoken to many other designers who have, where they would go and they're almost at the end and they come into like a screeching halt because in one of their usability tests, the users were like absolutely lost, or they didn't agree with it, or they would say like, I would not use this because XYZ. So then they had to go all the way back from the beginning and then kind of see where they went wrong. And I feel like a lot of us are scared to show that we did something wrong because we have to be perfect. We have to be, good at this in order to get hired. But that's actually not the way to think about it, because even a super experienced designer would always do something wrong, especially when they're working on a new project, because things get very complex. And instead of like hiding what went wrong, instead you should showcase how you react to it when you found out that you were wrong, right? Did you just say, oh no, I already came like way too far, it's still gonna work, and did you just kind of snowball to the end for, and create a product that that wouldn't really work? Or are you someone that says, that's able to tell yourself like, okay, you're absolutely wrong, and it's because you base it off of your assumption, so let's go back and let's rewind and now let's create a product that will work. Which type of designers are you? So yes, if there's any like turns or twist or anything that went wrong, and then also showing like how you fixed it and why you fixed it the way you fixed it, is a really big part of your story as who you are as a designer, but also like the story of how your product came to be. And another thing that I actually kind of wanted to touch upon the same point as Karen, which is about passion. So that's another thing where we want to communicate through our case study, because that is a big part of being a designer, right? There are those who come into the field because they were attracted to the money and the remote job, and that's fine, that's totally fine. But now if someone is genuinely passionate about their users, about UX design, about being a designer, then they're able to create a end product that is better because they will naturally immerse themselves into it, right? And so in general, I think Karen and I was talking previous, and she said that if they were in the same skill level, but one is passionate and one's not, she would go with the one that's passionate just for that reason. So now the other thought is, how do we bring our passion into a case study, into words and images? And there's a couple of ways to do that. And the first one is like anything that got you excited, or any like aha moments, any moments of clarity, confusion, distinction, anything that triggered you emotionally, you should include, because those are the things that made our brain click or kind of react in some sort of way. And the more you show little details like that, like how you were actually immersed in the product itself, it's going to show how passionate you are. So some of the ways that I did that was, for example, like Affinity Map. I love Affinity Map because I love taking all these like absurd amount of information we took from our research and a lot of abstract atom, and putting it and kind of like laying it out, organizing and finding patterns. Like this is one of my favorite things I did in terms of like the UX process. And because of that, I decided to highlight it. Like there's some it's like a cyclical behavior that I found while doing this that I thought was so cool, and it made a really big impact on my final product, and so I highlighted it. So things like that you want to highlight, and you want to go a little bit more into details, because then that really allows the user to tap into your mind and see what are your strengths, what makes you happy, what makes you excited about the product, right? And whichever part of that is not, it doesn't have just to be affinity map, whatever part, make sure that you focus and you highlight it. The next point is, again, going back to digging deep. So like, what does digging deep really mean? It's asking ourselves again, why, until we understand ourselves, our brain, why we do what we do in a much deeper level, like way beyond the surface. So again, like pick apart your product, pick apart your process, pick apart how you got from, you know, A to B. Like, how did you get from, let's say, your usability test? Okay, your first usability test, you got the feedback like, oh, the homepage is way too overcrowded and it's hard to read. So then you came up with another design. Dig deep and ask yourself, okay, so then if I got these feedback, why did I decide to change it like this? What about it? Why did my brain decide to lay out the information this way? Why did I think that laying out the information this way would make it less cluttered and more clear? So once you start asking yourself like why, and really picking your brain apart and figuring out why it does the way it does, then you'll be able to figure out what information you want to put in your case study, what information is important, what information will showcase the way your brain works, and what information isn't really necessary. But until you know how your brain works and why you do things the way you do on a very subconscious level, you won't really be able to communicate those. Because if you don't know it, how you're able to tell others, right? So really dig deep and ask yourself why in every little details in every single section of your portfolio. And it does take a long time, but that's really going to make like really move your portfolio into the right direction. And for me, that was like my clicking point. Before I did that, I literally applied to like almost 120 places and I got 0 feedback. But then after I started digging deep and understanding myself as a designer, that's when everything changed and I started getting a lot of like responses from my application. And the 2 more points. So the second to last is, all right, so now we have all this and we gathered all this information, we figured out ourselves, we figured out the story that we want to lay out, the information we want to take out and put in. And now it's like, how do we gather all of these bits and pieces and like stitch it together and make it into an interesting story without it taking 5 years for someone to read, right? So first one is keeping it clean and organized. And this kind of goes hand in hand with our last call, which was all about like the visual hierarchies and how to improve the case study in terms of like the UI. So one part about keeping something clean and organized is spacing. So like if you can tell, I have a lot of spacing in my portfolio, and this took a long time for me to learn because the spacing gives the users like a fresh breath of air. They're able to like go from one section and then break, relax, reset, and go to the next section. So that's going to make everything a lot more cleaner, a lot more digestible. Another thing is consistency. So consistency between colors and fonts, like don't have too many fonts, don't have too many colors, choose a theme, and also consistent frameworks. So for example, mine will always have title, body, image, title, body, image, right? Title, body, image. So if you keep your structure consistent, it'll train the user how to read your case study. Another thing is make it to the point. Don't do like crazy big paragraphs. Keep everything short and sweet. I don't know if anybody knows this. I guess I don't know what the word for it, but it's called KISS. So keep it short and simple, or keep it short stupid, whichever you want to go with. This is something I learned in sales, where if you go on and on and on, you're going to lose the user. They're not going to be impulse anymore, and they're gonna lose like all interest. It's kind of like you have that one friend that comes to you, and for like 5 hours she's like blah 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 blah. After all, you're like okay, like when is this gonna finish? It's the same thing. Keep your case study, your paragraphs, the information you're relaying it as short as possible, and trying to figure out what's the best way to get the same thing across, but in less word and maybe in a visual way. Another thing is visual hierarchy. Utilize visual hierarchies to gather all the thoughts. So for example, like this, right? Actually, let's go to one of my favorite sections. So this is the user research. So now everyone who's done user research knows that we come out with pages of notes per user. So how do we get all of that information and show it to the user all in one screen? It is clustering your information, simplifying it, and using visual hierarchy to display the information. For example, I'm going to go over this real quick because, again, we went in a little bit more detail in the last call. I wanted them to see this first because I want them to know that this was a user interview. And then I wanted them to see this second because this is my biggest finding, the biggest impact that it will have in my overall product. And so that's what I want them to see second. So utilizing visual hierarchy to draw their attention to what you want them to focus on is a really big part of like the storytelling, because right, you're leading them through the story. So that's exactly what visual hierarchy does. It leads their eyes to exactly where you want them to go, first, second, third, and fourth. And then the last point I wanted to make is impact. So whatever you're showing in your case study should have an impact on the final product. That's the reason why you did it, right? And so figuring out like, why do you have it up? Because sometimes like it might have not had the biggest impact, but the bootcamp told us to, because the bootcamp is trying to teach us everything we need to know. So it's included. So figuring out like, did it have an impact, and trying to figure out what to put in, what to take out is also like pretty much trying to figure out, does it fit in the story? Do I want to take it out the story, or do I want to include it? So there's two questions that help me figure out what to do. Is one, ask myself, again, going back to the why, like, why did I do this? And the second one is, did this have an impact on my product? If the answer was yes, then I ask myself, okay, so am I communicating that impact through my case study? And then if the answer to those first two questions is no, then is, why am I adding it to my portfolio? Why am I talking about it? Why am I adding it to my story? So if if the answer is no, then sometimes, like for example, my sitemap, it didn't really have a big impact on my product, to be honest. Like it's very simple. It wasn't complex. But I also decided to add it to my story because I did want to showcase that I know what a sitemap is, right? But then also going back to like a persona. So a persona, if everybody has gotten feedback, everyone knows that some people say, yes, you need it. And some people say, no, you don't. And I had to decide whether I wanted to take it out or not. But then again, I dug deep and I asked myself, like, did this have a big impact on my product? And it did. Like over the course of time when I was creating my product, I edited my persona. And after looking at it, I finally figured out who my user was, which is Laura. And that is part of the story. So I decided to put it in, even though it has a very like controversial feedback. So that's pretty much sums up all of my points. And yeah, it really goes back to like less of the what, show more of the why, and more of like how you did things. But yeah, so we're gonna open up the floors for some questions, but I hope it was all useful tips.
Yes.
Oh,
Okay. Oh, sorry, I was gonna say I did see a question. So really quick, it says, what would you recommend for people who have a case study where they came in mid-phase for a project, i.e., right, like to where that person wasn't there for the ideation and early stages of the project? I think I'd just be honest with the recruiter, whoever's interviewing you, just tell them the truth, like, hey, this is what happened, but this is where you switch it to like, I wasn't here, but I met with the team to really understand what we were looking for, or I did research and I saw the notes and gather all the information. But I don't see a problem with that, but I would just want you to be honest, right? Instead of you making up a story, don't just Just be honest. Just be honest and tell the truth, and that's gonna go a long way. That's fine. So fine.
Yeah, and
And
I kind of wanted to actually tag along that a little bit.
yeah.
I've been speaking to a lot of my friends who kind of graduated roughly in the same time as I did and found a job roughly the same. None of us had to start from the beginning because we all came into companies with an existing product, existing user base.
Yeah.
So yeah, if that's the case, then I think showcase it the way you would do it. So when you come in, you wouldn't just start designing. You would try to learn about the company, their goals, the business goals, their users, blah blah. So same thing in your case study. That's how I would personally go about it.
Yeah, for sure. Yep, yep. Any other questions? You can either type it in the chat or just open it up, like unmute, whatever you prefer. Yeah. But thank you. I see some of the comments that it was helpful. So thank you. We hope it's helpful. Really, we do it because like we love UX, especially especially storytelling. I think it's it's one of my favorites. I tried to tell G that it's her favorite too, so I'm getting it in her brain. I think it's her favorite too. So yeah, so yeah, really hoping it was useful because it's important. It's really important, and we love it as well. Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, well, we'll post the recording once it's finished uploading, and I will on this chat, like on the event, maybe I can comment and put the link for the recordings. But yeah, if no one has questions, I do have a question for. Oh, actually, we do have a question. Yeah, Karen, do you want to answer first, or should I go first?
You can go first if you like. Sorry, my dog is acting up, so you might hear him in the back. So you can go first for the.
Okay. Yes, that would definitely change the story. If if right now you're in fintech and you're trying to change to, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, whatever it is, e-commerce. I would not really present a fintech. Okay, a dating app. Yes. I would not necessarily present a fintech. I would probably try to work on a dating app or whatever and get experience there. And that's what I would share. Because again, like you want your story to connect with there. You can talk all about fintech and they won't care because then like what can you bring to the table as a dating app designer? Also,
Yeah.
like
Sorry.
sorry, just one more point. Make sure your language changes. Every industry and every little sector has their language and their lingo, and try and follow people who are a dating app UX designer and try and see what are the vocabularies they use, what are the words they use, and then try and adapt that into your interviews.
I think to follow up your question, Jennifer, with the project, the fictional project, I think that's fine. That's totally fine because I remember like with G, right? Like and even with Tiani, with the other portfolio that I showed you, her background is actually in architecture design, and G's is in fashion design, right? So it was different. So even if you can do, I think a fictional one would work as well. But if you can do like a volunteer one, or like I think that would be a little more helpful because you can be like, oh, I did this, this, and that, right? Even if you can just volunteer with a small company to be like, hey, I'll help you out. But that's something that you can also use. And then if you do have the fintech and trying to change it, yes, your story would change. And then just make sure that like G was saying, right, connect the words to the job description maybe of that dating app. Like read the job description and try to share your story with that connection of like, hey, I did this, but I translated it to this, this fictional project and to X, Y, and Z. This is how this information worked. So just try to I'm against people hiding their skills. So you can talk about your fintech, but just don't make it the star, right? Talk about the fictional and then talk about what you can also do. That it's more than just a fintech story. So even if it's anything else, even if you just have fintech, maybe try to do 2 different things of something else. So they see that you have like different projects and it's not just a specific one. So, I don't know if that helped at all. I know I just rambled, but I think with the ones that I've seen that worked, it's because they still had their stuff that they've done, but we're able to talk about the future, really, of like, hey, I can also do this. I'm not just a swimsuit designer or a building designer, right? So
No, in terms of like fictional or like a actual job project, I had okay, so I had for those who took Springboard will know that we have a case study, we have like a what is like a 5-day sprint or something like that, and then we have our like internship, like a month internship. I had my first internship fell apart, so that was done. So then we got into a second internship. So I utilized those in my resume. Even though the first one fell apart, I still used it because block your ears, Karen. No one will know. They wouldn't know. Right? So a little bit of lying. And then but then when I presented it, I presented my case study, which was Pennyview, the one you saw, because that was the most robust project I have done from the beginning to the end. And I expressed it to them. They were like, "Oh, share us a project." I was like, "Okay." So with so I interned. Well, I didn't say intern. I was a UX designer for Happy Howl and Swende, but I wanted to share you this project because this shows who I am as a designer from beginning to end. So that's how I phrased it, and that's what I said before. Also, there's if you didn't take Springboard and you weren't like matched with a internship, there's other ways to get that to utilize it in your portfolio or your resume. You could do volunteer work, like Catch a Fire is great. I was in the process of finishing out that volunteer work, and I would have used it in my resume and my portfolio, but I got lucky and I landed this job before then. So is it 100% necessary to get like an actual job project? It'll help, but there are ways to present your case, your capstone project. Also, like if you don't mention student, don't make yourself look like a student. Don't highlight anything that makes you like a student, no experience, zero experience, completely newbie. None of that. Don't highlight that.
like, it's fine. It's in your resume. We can see it. So that's fine. That's fine. Perfect. Okay. Okay. I think that our time is up right now. So yeah, we will send the recording over later today. You'll see it in our profiles in LinkedIn, and also the rest of them should be there. Like G created a YouTube channel for us, so all of them are there. So after you see the link, you can follow along and see the other sessions there as well if you need to. Okay. Yep. And thank you all for coming. And the next one, we are going to have one of our hiring managers coming to present. So if you have any questions for hiring manager specific, be thinking about that, because we would like to open the floor. And also if you have questions in advance, so that way we can prep her to help us. So she's amazing. So keep that in mind. You're going to hear from more than just, us. So it's going to be really cool to bring her along and give some of her feedback and her perspective and what she sees. So yeah. Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye.